Hi, this is Steve with OS Nexus. And in this video, we're going to go over setting up QuantaStor for use with Veeam. So what I have set up so far is just QuantaStor standard install on 4 servers. And in this video, we're going to use virtual machines because that was easier for me to go set up. And the first thing we're going to do here is create a cluster. And we're going to select all the boxes to form the cluster. One of the things that you have to do when you form a cluster is set the domain suffix. This is really important for, especially for the object storage configurations. I'm just going to set this to osnexus.net, but you would set this to whatever the domain is for your organization. This is also the time to choose encryption and or compression if you want to turn those features on for the cluster, because those are applied cluster-wide. And I'm just going to leave it with the defaults, selected all the nodes. The client interface and the backend interface, I'm doing this with a single network for this demonstration. You can have separate front-end and back-end networks. The client interface is where all the S3 traffic is going to come into and from the box. So all that I/O to your host to the application is the client interface. The back-end interface, that's all the east-west traffic. That's the internode communication. And what we've been doing more often these days is just building a faster network, like a 100 gigabit Ethernet network or 50 gigabit Ethernet with like 225 gigs bonded together, and using that as a single network because it's just a lot easier to set up and configure. So we're kind of essentially doing that here. We've just got everything using the 10.0.8 network, and the dialog just set that up for us. So takes a minute for that to complete. The monitors are monitoring all the services, monitoring the OSDs to see which ones are online and offline. So those are sort of the traffic cops for the cluster. QuantaStor automatically sets those up for you. If the cluster is less than 5 nodes, it creates 3 monitors. If it's 5 or more nodes, then it would be creating 5 monitors. It takes a couple of minutes for the monitors to finish getting created and to transition from the initializing to the normal state. And then once that's done, we're ready to go and add storage to the cluster. So we're going to add our storage devices by going to the Data and Journal Devices tab and choosing Create OSDs and Journals. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take these 100 gig devices and use those as our journal devices. And that's going to speed up the overall performance for our data devices. So typically these are NVMe all-flash devices. You're going to want to allocate about 64 gigabytes of capacity, mirrored capacity, from your SSDs for each data device. So if these were 10 terabyte drives and you've got 10 of them per server, you would take those 10 devices times 64, means that you need 640 gigabyte SSDs. So you'd round that up and get a pair of 800 gigabyte SSDs for those 10 hard drives. Those would be mirrored together. QuantaStor takes care of mirroring it for you. So these are going to be paired together. The pair of drives for 81, 82, and 83. Each of these devices is going to be mirrored together using software RAID 1. Now we're going to add all of our data devices. So the data devices are where the actual data is going to go, whereas the journal is where the write log and the metadata offload comes into play. Here for the data devices, we want it to go and provision some storage from our journal groups. And so it's going to go and get 2 gigabytes for the write-ahead log and 60 gigabytes for metadata offload. And you can adjust that. If you have more space on your SSDs, then you might take it up to 90 or more space for the metadata offload, but 60 is a good number. Allow provisioning from pre-existing journal groups. That's handy for when you're going to add more OSDs in the future. It basically says, yeah, you can provision more space from the existing journal groups. So in an all-flash configuration, we would just put all the devices in here as data devices, and then we wouldn't be creating external wall and MDB, we just unselect these. That's about it. So we've gone and selected all of our data devices, we've selected all of our journal devices, we've got everything just basically set to defaults, and then we increase the size of this to 60. Now in this case, I don't actually have enough space on my SSDs for a metadata offload device of 60 gigabytes, so I'm going to reduce that down to just 3, but in a production config, you'd want to set that to 60. One other thing to note is that you can press the auto config button in this dialog and it will auto configure things for you. So when you're setting up a new cluster, you can just click that and it'll make a whole bunch of intelligent decisions on how to go select the devices based off of their size and type. All right, we're ready to go create our data devices now, and the OSD creation is now done. They're still in the initializing state. You can click on the cluster at the top here to see the state of all of the OSDs across the whole cluster, or you can select individual nodes and just see the group of OSDs that are on those specific nodes. I'm using virtual machines here, so we're not going to see the hardware configuration on the far right, but if we had configured this with, say, Western Digital or Supermicro or Dell servers, you'd be able to select the server and see exactly which slot each of these OSDs is located in. It's time to set up the object storage pool. So to do that, we're going to the Scale-out Storage Pool section. We're going to click Create Storage Pool. I have 4 nodes in this cluster, so I'm going to set up 2+2 erasure coding. That means for every 2 data chunks, we're going to have 2 coding chunks, and that allows us to have 2 servers go offline without losing access to data. And click OK, and it's going to go set up that object storage pool for us. All of these steps that we're going through are available as a guide. In the upper right hand corner, you can go to the Getting Started page and then choose Scale-out S3 storage setup. And so we've done these first few steps. We created the cluster, we added the OSDs or the data devices to the cluster. We've just now created the S3 storage pool. And then the last few steps here are to go and add S3 gateways to each of the servers. And then we can add S3 users and create S3 buckets. So now that we've created the object storage pool, we're ready to go and add gateways to the cluster. We're just going to use the defaults here. So we have started creating the Rados gateway on that. You can see the task running in the tasks bar. And then once that's complete, we'll start creating the next Rados gateway. You want to do these one at a time. The next version of QuantaStor is going to have the ability to create these in bulk across all the selected nodes. So now we're ready to create the next S3 gateway. Okay, now we've got our 3 Rados gateways created and we've got a 4th one on the way. Now we're going to go create an S3 user. So to do that, we're going to go to the users and groups section. I'm going to just create one called Veeam admin. Call this Veeam admin. Now that we've got the Veeam admin account created, we're going to go create some buckets. To do that, we're going to go to the main storage management tab and go to the S3 bucket section, and we're going to create an S3 bucket. And the next thing we're going to do is assign it to the Veeam admin account that we just created a minute ago. And next, we're going to choose how many objects we estimate to go into the repository. If you pre-shard, that's what this is essentially doing, is it's making the bucket database bigger to begin with. And so then it's not going to need to rebalance that database or expand the database until much later. When it goes to expand the database, there's a little bit of a performance hit while it's expanding. And by doing this pre-sharding, by estimating the number of objects that are going to go into the bucket, we delay that and potentially eliminate the need for it to rebalance the bucket specific database. And so on a really large configuration, you might set it to like 100 million or 500 million objects. For this demonstration, I'm just going to set it to 10 million. Again, you don't need to do this step, but it helps smooth out the performance. And next, we're going to choose Enable for object lock configuration. This makes the object locking feature available to Veeam. You don't want to choose governance or compliance modes. These will create problems for Veeam. In these modes, object locking is turned on automatically, which takes the control away from Veeam. We want Veeam to control the object locking, and so we want the feature on, but we don't want governance and compliance. Now we're creating the bucket, and once the bucket is created, we'll see it here. So here's our Veeam backrep, and now we can start using this storage. But before we do that, I want to create one more storage pool. we're going to create a scale-out file storage pool so that when we set up Veeam, we'll be able to set up a performance backup repository and a capacity tier backup repository so that we can set up SOBR, the scale-out backup repository that dynamically moves data between the performance tier and the capacity tier. So let's go create that scale-out NAS configuration. So here we're going to click on create scale-out NAS pool. Yes, we do need a metadata server. We'll throw that on the first node. And then as soon as that metadata server is created, you're going to see it show up here. We're going to add one more for redundancy. So we're going to add another MDS here onto the second node. And given that we've got 2+2 erasure coding set up, we want to be able to lose any two nodes, and we don't want to lose the two nodes that are running the metadata servers. So instead of just having two metadata servers, we're going to set up a third one here. So let's click that, choose add metadata server, and now we've got 3 metadata servers set up. So now when we create our scale-out file system, any two nodes can go offline and we'll still be able to write to our file storage. All right, so now let's go create the file system. And we're going to call this backup pool. And then we're going to set this to 2+2 erasure coding because we have 4 nodes. And the scaling factor basically indicates how much of the capacity of the cluster you plan to put into this backup pool. I start the cluster with like a 50-50 between the object storage and the file storage. You might set it to 25-75 or something like that. And then just click OK. This is going to go create our scale-out file storage pool. There it is. You can see it's got a little hourglass on it because it's busy initializing and setting up the pool. When that's done, we're going to go create a network share on that pool that we're going to use for our performance tier. And what you're going to see here is 2 sub-pools of the file system get created. There's the data pool and the metadata pool. The performance pool ideally is running on some all-flash storage to make your backups really quick to that performance tier. And inside of QuantaStor, what you can do is switch this backup pool, this scale-out file system, to use all-flash storage by simply clicking on this and choosing Modify Pool so that this switches over to an SSD rule. So the redundancy rule on this, if we make it SSD rule, that means it's going to put it all on flash storage. And we would do that for both this data pool and the metadata pool. And now you're going to have much faster performance for your scale-out file system versus your object storage tier, which is going to be a hybrid mix of platter with some SSD to accelerate it. So now that we've got our scale-out file system created, let's go create a network share on it. And you do that by going to the main network share section and right-click and say create share. You can also choose that from the ribbon bar at the top. And we're going to call this vPerformance. And one of the things that you're going to want to do here is under the user section, we're going to create this other user account that I created a minute ago, a valid user, and we're going to assign it as the owner of that share. We're going to set this to default. The owner is the Veeam admin, and Veeam admin here is a valid user. And can additionally set Windows Extended ACLs turned on, but effectively that's all that we need to do. And here we've selected our backup pool as the pool to go create the share on. If you have multiple pools, you want to be sure that you've got the right one selected, and click OK. And that's going to go create our vPerformance share that we're going to use as our performance tier. So now I've logged into the Veeam server and we're ready to go create our backup repositories. So click on Add Repository in the top left corner, and we're going to add our performance tier first. And you're going to select the SMB share section, going to name it. So we'll write this as vPerformance. And we'll put in the path to that. And we're going to put in the credentials for that Veeam admin user that we added to QuantaStor earlier. And now it's going and scanning that share to make sure that it can write to it. It's got the proper permissions for it. It found it. It looks good. It says we've got just 65 gigabytes free on it, and that's because we're using virtual machines for the demo here. And you click next and apply, and you've got your performance tier repository set up. This takes a few seconds here for it to finish, and we're done. So there's our V performance. Now let's go create our V capacity tier. So that's going to use our object storage. Same thing, we're going to click on backup repositories, choose add repository. We're going to then go here to object storage this time, S3 compatible, and we'll call this one V capacity. And the service point is going to be the address of one of the Rados gateways. You could load balance across multiple gateways and point to an IP address or a host name there. And the best place to go get this URL that you're going to use for the service point is to go back to the QuantaStor UI. So let me bring that up. And if you go to the Scale-out storage configuration section and go to the S3 gateways, you'll see the URL right here. And then we're going to need to select our credentials, which I added in earlier, but you can just add them by clicking this add button and putting in the access key and secret key for your user account. And those credentials, you can get those also from the QuantaStor UI. Here you're going to go to the users and groups and go to the Veeam admin account that we created earlier. Go to the S3 users and this is the Veeam S3 user account, which is different from the management user account. And click on View S3 access keys. Click Show Key Text, and that's where we can copy and paste these to. I already did this step, so that's why we see this key here for XHEQ already. That has already been added. So we're just going to select that and then choose Next. And it's saying here that the CA cannot be verified. And that's because when you set up a scale-out object storage configuration with QuantaStor, we automatically make self-signed certificates. And so here you just say continue to accept those. Otherwise, you can go into the QuantaStor boxes and put your own self-signed certificates into the system. And the bucket that we're going to select, we're going to choose the V capacity bucket. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this V capacity bucket, when I created it, I chose the option to enable object locking. And when you do that, you must choose this option. Otherwise, it'll give you an error if you try to continue on. And now it's saying I need to choose a particular folder within the bucket. And so within the bucket, you're just going to create a folder for the Veeam backups. I'm just going to call it Veeam. It uses a folder within the object store. And now we just say next, and it's going and creating that object storage repository for us. And this is going to be our capacity tier. So we've got two repositories we've just created, the V performance, which is using our Scaleout NAS, and this V capacity that's using our Scaleout object. So those are the two repositories that we've just created. Now we're ready to go create a Scaleout repository. So choose Scaleout repository here and choose add Scaleout repository. And we're going to bring the performance and the capacity tier together. So we're going to call this SOBR for Scale-out Backup Repository. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask us, what do you want to use for that performance tier? So we're going to choose the V performance and click OK. I'm just going to use the defaults, data locality. Here, we want to extend this to use our capacity tier. So I'm going to check that box and choose our object storage for that. This is by default going to move the backups over to the capacity tier after they're more than 14 days old. You can copy directly to the backup tier immediately, which can be helpful if you want it dual copies or to get that stuff off onto the object tier right away. So that's another option that you can do. And that's it. So I'm going to click apply. And now we've got our tiered repository system. We have both our performance tier and our capacity tier, and they're combined together using SOBR to make it a object repository that will automatically move data from the performance tier to our object storage tier or capacity tier automatically for us. This takes a second or two to finish up creating the Scale-out Backup Repository. Once it's done, we click Finish, and there we go. So we've got vSOBR, we've got V capacity and V performance. And that's all there is to setting up backup repositories that are going to do auto tiering for you in Veeam with QuantaStor. If you have any questions, write us at info@osnexus.com, and thanks for watching.